What happens when a harmless joke suddenly crosses a line that no mother is willing to forgive? Imagine the cameras are rolling, the audience is laughing, and Jennifer Hudson and Sherri Shepherd are sitting across from each other in what seems like an ordinary celebrity conversation. Everything is relaxed until the subject of Jennifer's son comes up. At first, Sherri's comments sound like playful teasing, and Jennifer even smiles. But then the tone changes. One comment becomes another, and suddenly Sherri allegedly describes Jennifer's son as a loser, right there in front of the audience. The laughter disappears. Jennifer's smile fades. She turns toward Sherri and asks one question that instantly changes the atmosphere. "Did you really just say that about my son?" The studio falls completely silent. Sherri tries to explain that it was only a joke, but Jennifer isn't laughing anymore. Then Jennifer stands up and everyone in the room realizes this conversation may have gone way too far. What happens next in this fictionalized scenario is the kind of explosive celebrity drama that would have the internet talking for days. But before we get to that shocking moment, we need to understand how the conversation went from laughter and friendly banter to a confrontation nobody expected. The studio was still buzzing, but something had changed. Just moments earlier, the audience had been laughing along with Jennifer Hudson and Sherri Shepherd, yet now the laughter felt forced, almost nervous. Jennifer remained seated, her eyes fixed on Sherri as if she were trying to figure out whether the comment had really been intentional. Sherri leaned back and attempted to smile, but the expression on her face no longer carried the same confidence. "Come on, Jennifer, you know I'm joking," she said, trying to move the conversation forward. But Jennifer didn't respond immediately. She took a slow breath, looked toward the audience, and then back at Sherri. That silence created more tension than any argument could have. Everyone was waiting for Jennifer to laugh it off, but she didn't. Instead, she quietly asked Sherri to repeat exactly what she had said about her son. Sherri hesitated. The cameras were still rolling, and somewhere backstage, producers were suddenly paying very close attention to what was happening on stage. Jennifer's expression remained calm, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was holding back a much stronger reaction. Then Sherri made the mistake of trying to explain the comment again, and this time she went even further. The audience let out a collective gasp. Jennifer slowly stood from her chair. For a few seconds, neither woman spoke. Even the studio seemed to stop breathing. Sherri looked at Jennifer and realized that this was no longer a playful television moment. Jennifer took one step forward and said, "There are a lot of things you can say about me, but don't bring my son into this." The words were quiet, but they landed harder than a shout. Sherri immediately tried to defend herself, insisting that she never intended to hurt anyone. But Jennifer wasn't looking for another explanation. She wanted to know why her son had become the target of a joke in the first place. And then, just when it seemed like the two women might finally calm down, Sherri said something that made Jennifer stop completely. The audience couldn't hear every word clearly, but they could see Jennifer's reaction change. Her face became serious. Her eyes widened slightly. She looked toward the production team and then back at Sherri. Whatever had just been said had apparently crossed an even deeper boundary. The producer closest to the stage suddenly moved forward, while a few audience members began whispering to one another. Jennifer didn't move. She simply stood there, staring at Sherri. And for the first time that afternoon, nobody knew whether Jennifer was about to walk away or whether the situation was about to become something neither of them could take back. And that was the moment everything changed. The studio had gone completely silent. Jennifer Hudson was standing just a few feet away from Sherri Shepherd, and for what felt like an eternity, neither woman said a word. The audience could sense that something serious was happening, but nobody knew exactly where the moment was heading. Sherri tried one final time to explain herself, saying that she'd only been joking and that Jennifer was taking the comment too seriously. But instead of calming things down, those words seemed to push Jennifer even closer to her breaking point. Jennifer looked at Sherri and quietly said, "You don't get to disrespect my child and then tell me how I'm supposed to feel about it." Sherri's expression changed. She realized that the conversation had gone far beyond a simple joke. A producer rushed toward the stage, signaling for the cameras to cut, but the cameras were still rolling for several tense seconds. Jennifer took a breath and stepped closer. The audience gasped. Sherri instinctively moved backward. The confrontation reaches its shocking climax. Jennifer suddenly loses her composure and slaps Sherri. The sound cuts through the studio, leaving everyone frozen. For one brief second, nobody reacts. Sherri stands there in disbelief. her hand slowly moving toward her face as the audience erupts in shocked whispers. Jennifer immediately steps back, seemingly realizing the seriousness of what just happened. The producer finally cuts the cameras, security moves onto the stage, and the audience is instructed to remain seated. But the damage has already been done. What started as a conversation about motherhood has turned into a moment that neither woman can simply erase. Sherri looks toward Jennifer, stunned, while Jennifer's expression begins to change from anger to regret. The adrenaline that had fueled the confrontation suddenly disappears, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence. Jennifer knows she crossed a line, even though she believed she was defending her son. Sherri knows her words had crossed a boundary too. And now both women are facing the same question. How do you undo a moment that happened in front of cameras, producers, and a room full of witnesses? But what neither of them realizes yet is that the story is about to become even bigger. Somewhere outside that studio, rumors are already beginning to spread. Someone has apparently recorded part of the confrontation on a phone. Within minutes, whispers start moving through the building. Then a producer receives a message that makes everyone stop. A clip of the argument may already be online. Jennifer looks toward the producer. Sherri looks toward the door. And suddenly, the biggest question isn't what happened inside the studio anymore. The producer immediately stepped onto the stage, his expression far more serious than anyone had seen before. He looked at Jennifer first, then turned toward Sherri, making it clear that what had just happened could not simply be brushed aside. He warned both women that this was a television set, not a private argument, and that millions of viewers could potentially see what had happened. He told them that whatever feelings they had, they needed to control the situation before it became even bigger. Jennifer stood silently, still visibly emotional, while Sherri looked away, trying to process everything that had just happened. The producer gave them one final warning. If either woman continued the confrontation, the entire segment would be shut down. But neither Jennifer nor Sherri seemed ready to back down completely. Jennifer insisted that she was defending her son and that she wasn't going to apologize for being a mother who cared about her child. Sherri, meanwhile, argued that she had been joking and that Jennifer had taken things too far. The producer shook his head, realizing that neither woman was willing to simply accept his warning. Then, instead of continuing to argue with them, he turned toward the audience. The atmosphere suddenly became even more unusual. He grabbed the microphone and said that since the audience had witnessed everything, there was only one question he wanted answered. "We're going to put the argument aside for a moment," he announced. "I want to know something from all of you. If you had to choose, who do you like more?" The audience erupted. Some people immediately shouted Jennifer's name. Others started cheering for Sherri. A few people laughed nervously, while others looked completely shocked that the producer had turned the tense situation into an unexpected audience vote. Jennifer glanced toward the crowd, almost unable to believe what she was hearing. Sherri crossed her arms and waited. The producer raised his hand and asked everyone to make their choice clear. "Jennifer Hudson?" he shouted. A huge wave of applause filled the studio. Jennifer looked surprised. Then the producer turned toward the other side of the audience. "Or Sherri Shepherd?" Another section of the audience erupted, this time chanting Sherri's name. Suddenly, the studio was divided. One side was cheering for Jennifer. The other side was supporting Sherri. And just when it seemed like the argument might finally become a popularity contest, the producer asked the question that made everyone go silent again. "But after what you just witnessed today, who do you think was actually right?" Jennifer looked at Sherri. Sherri looked back at Jennifer. Neither woman answered. The audience waited. The cameras slowly moved closer. And somewhere backstage, a producer quietly whispered that this segment was becoming something much bigger than anyone had planned. Because now the audience wasn't just choosing their favorite television personality. They were being asked to judge the entire confrontation. And the answer they gave next could completely change the direction of the show. The producer stepped back toward the center of the stage and slowly raised the microphone, realizing that the tension between Jennifer Hudson and Sherri Shepherd had completely changed the atmosphere of the show. He looked toward the audience and announced that they were going to make the decision themselves. "Tonight, we're putting the question directly to you," he said. "Who do you like most, Jennifer Hudson or Sherri Shepherd?" The audience immediately erupted, and the producer told everyone that there would be only one way to make their choice clear. They would vote for their favorite. Fans began shouting both women's names, while others started arguing playfully about which host deserved to win. Some audience members held up signs supporting Jennifer, while others cheered loudly for Sherri. The cameras moved across the crowd, capturing every reaction. Then the producer made the stakes even higher. He announced that, in this fictional storyline, the person who received the fewest votes would have to leave the show. For a moment, the entire studio went silent. Jennifer looked toward Sherri, clearly surprised by the announcement. Sherri raised her eyebrows as if she couldn't believe the producer had just made the competition that serious. Then the voting began. One fan stood up and shouted, "Jennifer!" Another yelled, "Sherri!" A woman in the front row said Jennifer had always been her favorite because of her talent and inspiring personality. A man behind her immediately responded that Sherri was his favorite because of her humor and connection with the audience. Within seconds, the studio was filled with competing chants. "Jennifer! Jennifer! Jennifer!" echoed from one side while the other side answered, "Sherri! Sherri! Sherri!" The producer watched carefully as the votes started being counted. Every new vote seemed to change the balance. Jennifer gained support from longtime fans who said they admired her journey, while Sherri's supporters praised her warmth, comedy, and ability to make people feel comfortable. Then the producer announced that the first unofficial count was surprisingly close. The audience gasped. Jennifer looked toward the screen displaying the numbers while Sherri leaned forward, waiting for the next update. The difference between them was only a handful of votes. Suddenly, a new group of fans began shouting Jennifer's name, while another section responded even louder for Sherri. The producer smiled and said, "This is much closer than we expected." But there was one problem. The final result wasn't ready yet. More votes were still coming in. And as the numbers continued changing, both women realized something terrifying. One of them could walk away from this competition as the audience's favorite, and the other could be forced to leave the show. The cameras zoomed in on their faces as the producer prepared to reveal the next count. Jennifer took a deep breath. Sherri folded her hands and stared at the screen. The audience fell silent. Then the producer finally said, "We have the latest numbers." He paused. "And you're not going to believe who's ahead." The studio seemed to hold its breath as the producer stood beneath the bright lights with the final voting results in his hands. And for several seconds, he said absolutely nothing, allowing the tension to build until even the audience members who had been shouting moments earlier became completely silent. Jennifer Hudson stood on one side of the stage while Sherri Shepherd remained on the other, both women watching the producer carefully, knowing that the fictional competition had reached its final moment. The producer looked toward the giant screen behind them, then slowly turned back toward the audience and said, "We have counted every vote, and the result is finally in." A wave of nervous excitement moved through the studio. Jennifer took a slow breath, while Sherri folded her hands and waited. The producer paused again before announcing, "The audience has chosen Jennifer Hudson." The studio immediately exploded. Fans stood from their seats, cheering, clapping, shouting Jennifer's name, and waving their hands toward the stage. The sound was so loud that Jennifer appeared momentarily overwhelmed by the reaction. She smiled, placed a hand over her heart, and looked toward the audience as if she couldn't believe how strongly people had supported her. But then the producer continued, reminding everyone that the fictional rules meant the person receiving fewer votes would have to leave the show. The energy in the room suddenly changed. Sherri's smile became smaller. She nodded slowly, accepting the result, but the disappointment on her face was impossible to miss. Some members of the audience who had supported her began applauding quietly, trying to show that losing the vote did not mean they had stopped respecting her. The producer announced that Sherri had finished behind Jennifer, and for a moment it appeared that the entire segment would end with a traditional winner and loser. Jennifer had won. Sherri had lost. The audience had made its decision. But then something completely unexpected happened. Instead of raising her hands in celebration, Jennifer looked across the stage at Sherri. She noticed the disappointment in her expression, and whatever excitement she had felt about winning seemed to disappear. Jennifer slowly walked toward her. The audience became quiet again, wondering what she was going to say. Sherri watched Jennifer approach, and for a few seconds the two women simply stood facing each other. Nobody knew whether Jennifer was going to say something about the argument, whether she was going to celebrate the victory, or whether another confrontation was about to begin. Then Jennifer opened her arms. Sherri looked surprised. Jennifer stepped forward and hugged her. The reaction was immediate. The audience erupted into a massive round of applause, with people standing, cheering, and calling both women's names. The hug lasted longer than anyone expected, and the cameras captured the emotional moment from every angle. Jennifer whispered to Sherri that she didn't want the vote to turn them into enemies. She told her that winning the audience's support meant nothing if she used that victory to make someone else feel small. Sherri appeared emotional, and after a moment, she returned the hug. The tension that had filled the studio earlier seemed to disappear. What had begun as an intense fictional confrontation had suddenly become a moment about forgiveness, dignity, and compassion. Jennifer stepped back and looked at Sherri, telling her that people could disagree, misunderstand each other, and even say things they regretted, but that didn't mean they had to carry the anger forever. Sherri nodded and admitted that the entire situation had become much bigger than either of them expected. She thanked Jennifer for choosing kindness at a moment when she could easily have celebrated her victory instead. The audience applauded again, and this time the applause wasn't divided. There were no longer separate Jennifer supporters and Sherri supporters. Everyone seemed to be celebrating the same thing. One audience member shouted, "That's what we wanted to see," and another yelled that the hug was more powerful than the entire competition. Jennifer turned toward the crowd and smiled. She explained that competition can create excitement, but people should never forget the humanity behind the competition. She said that a vote can tell you who people prefer, but it cannot determine someone's worth. Those words changed the atmosphere once again. Sherri stood beside her, listening carefully, and the audience responded with another wave of applause. The producer, who had originally created the fictional vote to determine which woman the audience preferred, suddenly realized that the result had produced something completely different from what he expected. He had wanted an answer to a simple question: Jennifer or Sherri? But Jennifer's reaction had created a much bigger answer. The audience had chosen Jennifer, but Jennifer had refused to treat Sherri like a defeated opponent. Instead, she had reached across the divide. And that gesture seemed to make the audience admire her even more. The producer then asked the audience how many people believed Jennifer had handled the ending the right way. Nearly every person in the studio raised a hand. The applause became deafening. Sherri looked around the room and smiled through her emotions. She admitted that losing the fictional vote was difficult, but she said Jennifer's gesture made the result easier to accept. She explained that sometimes losing isn't the worst thing that can happen. Sometimes losing teaches you something that winning never could. Jennifer nodded and said that she understood exactly what Sherri meant. Then Jennifer surprised everyone again by telling the audience that she didn't want Sherri's exit to feel like a punishment. She wanted it to feel like the end of one chapter, not the end of a person's value or career. The audience cheered. The producer looked toward Sherri and asked whether she had anything she wanted to say before leaving the stage. Sherri took the microphone and looked directly at Jennifer. She thanked her for the hug, then admitted that the conversation earlier had become emotional, and that both of them had allowed the pressure of the moment to get in the way of what really mattered. She said that sometimes people become so focused on being right that they forget to be kind. Jennifer listened quietly. Then Sherri turned toward the audience and thanked every person who had voted for her, telling them that their support meant more than a number on a screen. The fans responded with cheers, and some even began chanting her name. Jennifer joined in the applause. That moment was important because it showed that the audience could support Jennifer without disrespecting Sherri. The competition didn't have to end with humiliation. It could end with appreciation. Jennifer then stepped forward and told Sherri that she hoped this wouldn't be the last time they stood together on a stage. Sherri smiled and replied that she hoped so too. The two women hugged once more, and the audience immediately stood again. Cameras moved through the crowd, capturing people smiling, clapping, and holding up their phones to record the emotional scene. In the fictional storyline, the clip of the hug would become the moment everyone talked about, not the argument, not the voting numbers, and not even the controversy that started the entire situation. People would remember the decision Jennifer made after she had already won. She could have walked away celebrating. She could have reminded everyone that the audience had chosen her. She could have allowed Sherri to leave feeling defeated. Instead, she chose to make the moment about respect. That decision changed the way people viewed the entire confrontation. Some fans who had originally supported Jennifer began saying that they admired her even more because she showed compassion after winning. Others who had voted for Sherri admitted that they were disappointed by the result, but appreciated Jennifer's gesture. Social media in this fictional scenario would quickly fill with comments praising the hug. Clips would circulate with captions like "Jennifer chose kindness," "The hug everyone needed," and "This is how you win with grace." People would debate the confrontation, but the emotional ending would dominate the conversation. Some viewers would say Jennifer had proven that being the favorite wasn't about having the loudest supporters. It was about what you did when you had the advantage. Others would say Sherri deserved respect regardless of the vote. And many would agree that the most memorable part of the entire fictional story was the moment the competition stopped mattering. The producer eventually returned to the stage and admitted that he had expected the vote to create a dramatic winner and loser, but instead, Jennifer had completely changed the meaning of the result. He told the audience that they had chosen Jennifer as their favorite, but Jennifer had chosen something else: forgiveness. The audience applauded again. Jennifer smiled and looked toward Sherri, who was standing beside her. Then the producer asked Jennifer one final question. After everything that happened today, do you still consider this a victory? Jennifer paused before answering. She looked at the audience and then at Sherri. She said that if winning meant watching another person walk away feeling humiliated, then she didn't want that kind of victory. But if winning gave her the opportunity to show people that kindness could be stronger than anger, then perhaps the moment meant something more. The studio fell silent for a second before erupting into applause. Sherri placed a hand on Jennifer's shoulder and the two women smiled at each other. The producer thanked both of them and reminded the audience that people can disagree without becoming enemies. As the segment came to an end, Jennifer and Sherri stood together beneath the studio lights, surrounded by applause that no longer belonged to one woman alone. The audience had started the night divided, with some people cheering for Jennifer and others supporting Sherri. But by the end, they were standing together, applauding both. The fictional vote had produced a winner, but the emotional hug had changed the entire meaning of the competition. Jennifer had won the numbers, but she refused to use those numbers against Sherri. Sherri had lost the vote, but she didn't leave without dignity. And the audience discovered that sometimes the most powerful ending isn't watching one person defeat another. Sometimes it's watching someone win and still choose compassion. The cameras slowly pulled back as Jennifer and Sherri shared one final embrace, and the crowd continued cheering. For a moment, there were no sides, no rivalry, and no competition, just two people standing together after a difficult day. And perhaps that was the real lesson hidden inside the fictional drama. You can win without making someone else feel like a loser. The vote may have decided who the audience liked most, but the hug decided what kind of moment they would remember. And if this were the clip that eventually went viral, it wouldn't be because Jennifer won. It would be because, after winning, she chose to reach out to the person standing on the losing side. That single decision would transform the entire story from a confrontation into a lesson about forgiveness, respect, and the power of putting pride aside. In the end, the audience didn't leave talking only about Jennifer. They left talking about both women, about what happened, about what could have happened, and most importantly, about how differently everything ended because Jennifer chose a hug instead of another argument. And as the final applause faded and the studio lights began to dim, Jennifer and Sherri walked off the stage together, leaving the audience with one unforgettable image: a competition that began with tension, ending with compassion. And just like that, the fictionalized confrontation between Jennifer Hudson and Sherri Shepherd reaches a very different ending than anyone in the studio expected. What began with laughter turned into tension, exploded into an emotional confrontation, and eventually became a battle for the audience's support. The producer's vote appeared to create a clear winner and a clear loser, with Jennifer Hudson receiving more votes while Sherri Shepherd faced the possibility of leaving the show. But in the end, the numbers weren't what people remembered most. What people remembered was Jennifer walking toward Sherri after the result was announced and choosing to hug her instead of celebrating at her expense. That single moment completely changed the atmosphere. The audience had voted for a favorite, but Jennifer reminded everyone that popularity doesn't have to come at the cost of another person's dignity. In this fictional story, the real surprise wasn't who received the most votes. It was what Jennifer did after she won. Sherri's fictional loss also became something more meaningful than simply receiving fewer votes. She had supporters in the audience, people who continued cheering for her even after the results were announced. That showed that losing one vote does not mean losing everyone's respect. A person can lose a competition without losing their value. A person can make a mistake without being defined forever by that mistake. And perhaps that is something audiences sometimes forget when watching celebrity drama. We see the headlines, the arguments, the viral clips, and the dramatic moments, but behind all of those things are real human emotions. In this fictional scenario, both women eventually realized that the argument had become bigger than the original disagreement. Instead of allowing that moment to define them, they chose to move forward. And that's where the story leaves us with a question that goes far beyond Jennifer Hudson and Sherri Shepherd. What would you do if you won a competition against someone you had just argued with? Would you celebrate your victory? Would you walk away? Or would you reach out your hand and remind that person that losing doesn't make them less important? There is no single answer, but Jennifer's fictional choice gives us something to think about. Sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the person who wins the argument. Sometimes it's the person who knows when the argument is no longer worth continuing. The story also reminds us why words matter. The fictional conflict began with comments about a child, and that subject became emotional because children should never be treated as weapons in adult disagreements. Whether someone is famous or completely unknown, family can be a deeply sensitive subject. A joke that seems harmless to one person can feel deeply hurtful to another. That's why understanding boundaries matters. And when a mistake happens, an apology can sometimes do more than another argument ever could. It doesn't erase what happened, but it can create a path toward healing. Most importantly, this story should not be confused with a confirmed real-life event. The confrontation, slap, audience vote, and dramatic resolution described here are part of a fictionalized entertainment scenario. Jennifer Hudson and Sherri Shepherd are real people, but this story should be enjoyed as dramatic storytelling rather than presented as factual reporting. That's important because celebrity names can make fictional stories look real very quickly, especially when dramatic headlines and thumbnails are involved. The difference between entertainment and fact matters. So when you look back at this entire fictionalized story, what stands out? Was it the argument? Was it the shocking moment when everything appeared to fall apart? Was it the producer's unexpected decision to let the audience vote? Was it Jennifer winning? Or was it that final hug? For many think about how easily the story could have ended differently. Jennifer could have stood proudly while the audience celebrated her victory. She could have reminded everyone that the fans had chosen her. She could have allowed Sherri to walk away feeling embarrassed and defeated. After all, according to the fictional rules of the competition, Jennifer had won. But instead, she chose compassion. She recognized that behind the television personalities were two human beings who had experienced an incredibly emotional moment. And that is what made the ending so powerful. Winning a competition is temporary. The applause eventually fades. The cameras eventually turn off. The headlines eventually disappear. But the way you treat another person during their lowest moment can stay with them for a lifetime. Sherri's fictional loss also became something more meaningful than simply receiving fewer votes. She had supporters in the audience, people who continued cheering for her even after the results were announced. That showed that losing one vote does not mean losing everyone's respect. A person can lose a competition without losing their value. A person can make a mistake without being defined forever by that mistake. And perhaps that is something audiences sometimes forget when watching celebrity drama. We see the headlines, the arguments, the viral clips, and the dramatic moments, but behind all of those things are real human emotions. In this fictional scenario, both women eventually realized that the argument had become bigger than the original disagreement. Instead of allowing that moment to define them, they chose to move forward. And that's where the story leaves us with a question that goes far beyond Jennifer Hudson and Sherri Shepherd. What would you do if you won a competition against someone you had just argued with? Would you celebrate your victory? Would you walk away? Or would you reach out your hand and remind that person that losing doesn't make them less important? There is no single answer, but Jennifer's fictional choice gives us something to think about. Sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the person who wins the argument. Sometimes it's the person who knows when the argument is no longer worth continuing. The story also reminds us why words matter. The fictional conflict began with comments about a child, and that subject became emotional because children should never be treated as weapons in adult disagreements. Whether someone is famous or completely unknown, family can be a deeply sensitive subject. A joke that seems harmless to one person can feel deeply hurtful to another. That's why understanding boundaries matters. And when a mistake happens, an apology can sometimes do more than another argument ever could. It doesn't erase what happened, but it can create a path toward healing. Most importantly, this story should not be confused with a confirmed real-life event. The confrontation, slap, audience vote, and dramatic resolution described here are part of a fictionalized entertainment scenario. Jennifer Hudson and Sherri Shepherd are real people, but this story should be enjoyed as dramatic storytelling rather than presented as factual reporting. That's important because celebrity names can make fictional stories look real very quickly, especially when dramatic headlines and thumbnails are involved. The difference between entertainment and fact matters. So when you look back at this entire fictionalized story, what stands out? Was it the argument? Was it the shocking moment when everything appeared to fall apart? Was it the producer's unexpected decision to let the audience vote? Was it Jennifer winning? Or was it that final hug? For many viewers, the hug would be the moment that changed everything. It transformed a story about conflict into a story about compassion. It showed that even after an emotional disagreement, there can still be room for forgiveness. It showed that a winner doesn't have to make a loser feel small. And it reminded the audience that sometimes the most unforgettable moments happen after the competition is already over. Now I want to hear from you. If you had been sitting in that audience during this fictionalized scenario, who would you have voted for? Jennifer Hudson or Sherri Shepherd? And after seeing the way Jennifer handled the ending, would your opinion have changed? Would you have voted for Jennifer because of her confidence, talent, and emotional strength? Or would you have supported Sherri because of her humor, personality, and connection with the audience? Tell us your choice in the comments because I want to know which side you would have been on. And here's another question. Do you think Jennifer made the right choice by hugging Sherri after winning? Some people might say that once someone crosses a line, you don't owe them anything. Others might say that forgiveness and kindness are signs of real strength. Where do you stand? Write Jennifer if you think Jennifer handled the ending with grace. Write Sherri if you believe Sherri deserved the audience's support. And if you think the hug was the best moment of the entire story, simply comment, respect. If this fictionalized celebrity drama kept you watching until the very end, don't forget to like this video, because it helps support the channel and lets us know you want more dramatic celebrity storytelling. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Because here, we're not just interested in the loudest argument or the most shocking headline. We're interested in the moments that make you stop, think, and ask what you would have done differently. And remember, dramatic stories can be entertaining, but when they involve real celebrities, always check whether the claims are actually confirmed before believing or sharing them. Until the next story, stay curious, stay respectful, and remember one final thing. Winning isn't always about being the person standing on top. Sometimes the real victory is being strong enough to reach down and help someone else stand beside you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.